Welcome to CONVO, a live stream podcast about the intersection of creativity, art, and new technologies. Each month, we bring you 2 episodes featuring compelling and knowledgeable guests who are at the forefront of these exciting fields. I'm your host, Mark Redito. Let's dive into this episode. Welcome to our latest episode of CONVO. Today, we're diving deep into the ever-evolving world of music culture with Shawn Reynaldo, the founder of First Floor. As we all know, culture is a constantly shifting organism, and the pandemic has certainly brought about some major changes in the music world. During our conversation, we'll be exploring the current state of music media and journalism and the intergenerational tensions that sometimes arise between old and new music fans. We'll also be questioning whether there is still such a thing as indie or underground music in the current landscape. And we'll also be discussing the idea of raving and electronic music as a kind of folk art, and even touching on how Skrillex could be compared to Green Day. If you are curious about the latest cultural mutations happening in the music world, this episode is definitely not one to miss. Join us for this fascinating conversation with Shawn Reynaldo. Shawn, welcome to CONVO. Big fan of your work at First Floor. It's one of my favorite newsletters. I'm honored to have you on, dude. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you and I guess about myself. 90 minutes. I try not to talk about myself too much, but I guess in this forum, it's encouraged.
Yes, 1,000%. That being said, for people who don't know you or your work, can you please give us an introduction?
Sure. I'm a music journalist. I mean, that's basically the easiest way to describe me. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, but I now live in Barcelona. I've lived here for almost 8 years now. I've been involved in the music industry pretty much for the last more than 20 years now.
Dang.
And although I've spent the last decade or so as a music journalist, before that, I worked in radio for nearly a decade, both I did college radio, which a lot of, young Americans do. I did that. And then even after I graduated, I actually became the manager of my college radio station,
Wow.
which is KALX in Berkeley. So I was there for many years. I used to work in commercial radio as well, at an alternative rock radio station. And then what else did I do? I DJ'd through parties. I've run 3 different record labels. I've DJ'd in different places around the world. Let's see what else.
What are these record labels,
more.
Shawn? I'm curious.
So I've done 3 different record labels. The first one was called Double Negative. That one was kind of more post-punk, indie kind of stuff. That was during the early 2000s while I was living in Oakland and was kind of involved in there was a lot of warehouse shows and kind of rough around the edges, punk and hardcore and indie noisy stuff going on. So that was the first label. The second one was called Versa Discos, or without the accent, Versa Discos. That came about when I lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina for a year in 2007. And while I was down there, I got really involved in this music scene that was ended up being called electro cumbia.
Ooh,
so
sick. Hell yeah.
So cumbia is this Latin, style of music that's been around for decades. It's sort of a traditional folk dance from Latin America. Started in Colombia, but it's all over Latin America now. And at the time that I lived in Buenos Aires, there was this scene of producers who were kind of taking cumbia rhythms and cutting it up on their laptops and mixing it with electronic music and hip hop and dance hall and all kinds of stuff. And I just happened to be there Actually, out of that scene, there's a label called ZZK or ZZK that is still around now. It's gotten really big. But 15 years ago, like no one was really putting this music out or anything. So me and a friend, we were like, oh, we should just release some of this music.
Yeah.
So that was the second label, Aficionado. And I actually, one of the parties I threw for many years was devoted to that kind of music. That was in San Francisco. It was called Tormenta Tropical or Tormenta Tropical. And that was a really fun party, like during the late 2000s, early 2010s, like playing like kind of this hybrid Latin electronic music. So that was the second label. And then the third label was called Icy Hot. And that one started in the early 2010s. And that was me and some friends got really into sort of like UK based music. This is during the era of like Night Slugs and Hessel Audio, when like these labels were first starting, sort of like post dubstep music.
Kind of like future based or?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. That era. And we had a party also called Icy Hot that we did for 5 years. And we started a label and we're putting out records. And one artist, Avalon Emerson, who's actually now like this international famous person, her very first record came out on Icy Hot, which was just our luck. I'm not saying that we were some like curatorial wizards. She was just, at the time, was someone we knew from San Francisco. We asked if she wanted to put out a record, and, you know, we put it out, and then she went on to much bigger things. So those are the different labels I've done.
It's amazing. I mean,
and then
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I was going to say, and then, but what most people know me for is being a music journalist. And I worked at a magazine called Accelerator for many years, which, if people don't know it, it's spelled kind of funny. It's the letter XLR, the number 8R. And I wound up eventually becoming like the editor-in-chief there. I think I was there about 7 or 8 years. Then in 2015, I quit Accelerator, and that's when I moved to Barcelona. And I was freelancing for a little while, and I've written for Resident Advisor, DJ Mag, NPR, like Spin, lots of different publications. And I was also working a lot with Red Bull Music Academy. Eventually, I got like a full-time gig there. I was working with RBMA and also RBMA Radio, and did that until they closed in 2019. And then that's when I started First Floor, which is a newsletter, which is devoted to electronic music, and then the culture and industry around it. And then that's kind of just inadvertently become my primary gig. And I didn't intend for it to be, but now it takes up most of my time and energy. So yeah. That's like a very short, not short summary of my career.
But it's a rich experience, you know? And, you know, before I even encounter your work, you know, as First Floor, through First Floor, I remember, you know, Accelerator, and, you know, I think I shared with you, I'm also a music producer myself. I remember maybe sending demos to you like a long time ago. And, you know, but yeah, that was a time. That was a time. The early aughts in the 2010s where publications or music publications such as Accelerator, really were, yeah, it was an institution. I would still say it's an institution at this point still, you know, although evolving. I want to talk to you about, First Floor, you know, and the origins of it, and maybe what was the cultural landscape that maybe, I don't know if pushed you is the right word, or maybe inspired you to actually explore your own publication.
Well, I think in 2019, I was, you know, I've been working at RBMA for a number of years. And I mean, I had already been in charge, you know, I had been the editor-in-chief at Accelerator. I had written for all of the major dance music publications. And I just wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next. And once I found out that RBMA was going to go away, I was like, oh, well, I guess I need to start looking for a new job. But in the music industry, sometimes you get a new job in 2 weeks. Sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it takes really long time. So I was like, I want to take my time. Like, I want to find the right gig. But in the meantime, I don't want it to disappear. So I wanted to keep writing, and freelancing in electronic music is like, it's really like a labor of love if you're doing it, because the pay is so bad. Like,
if there's even a pay, you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember like contacting publications, and, they would be like, oh, well, we can pay you 20 cents a word. And that's only because you're really experienced. And so I would, write like a giant feature, and at the end, get paid $200 for it. And it's like, if I was, 20 years old, maybe that would be fine. But I was like, I'm an adult. Like, I need this, like, this is not working. And on top of the financial issue, to even start writing something, you have to do pitches to different editors. So you have to email editors and be like, hey, I have this idea that I think is interesting. I'd like to write about it. And you have to get them to say yes, and then negotiate a price that works for them and for you. And I was just finding that whole process like really uninspiring.
There's like pre-work to the work.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, after, not to be like full of myself at all, but I was like, I've been working in electronic music in various facets for 20 years at that point. And I think I have, I know what's interesting to me, and I know what kind of stories I would be commissioning if I was in charge of an outlet. So I'd really like to have some place where I could just explore these ideas without having to ask anybody. And I think people will be interested in this. So I had some friends and colleagues who had sort of like gotten into doing newsletters. Like, this is when Substack was first starting, and it just felt like there was like a small newsletter boom going on. It was just like kind of trendy. And I was like, oh, well, I'll start a newsletter, and, I can write whatever I want, and we'll see, we'll just see what happens, and it'll keep my name out there, and, a few people will read it, and then eventually a new job will come along, and then I'll stop or scale it back or whatever. And I actually went back. The first edition of First Floor was mailed out to 89 people. So like, it wasn't like there was like some giant rush to sign up for it when I started. Like, I didn't have any big expectations. I was like, this will just be a thing. And, some of my friends will read it, some of my colleagues in electronic music. And, I figured like, oh, it'll get to like a few hundred people eventually, or maybe 1,000 people. And, but then within a few months, like, I just noticed, like, I was like, oh, wow, people are signing up for this. People are reading it. Like, people are posting about it on Twitter and debating the merit of my arguments. And it just was like, oh, this is like a thing. And it just sort of gained momentum. And then, of course, in 2020, the pandemic happens. And then suddenly everyone was at home with all this free time. And like, I think I just kind of kept doing the newsletter throughout, because I was like, well, I'm home anyway, and no one was hiring for new jobs. And so I was like, I may as well just keep doing the newsletter. And it just kept growing and growing. And now it's, 3.5 years since I started it. And it's become this platform. I'm not going to say it's like the biggest thing in the world. It's still like a relatively niche endeavor, but it has a sizable audience. And I think especially within the electronic music world, it's a known thing. Especially people in the industry like reference it. PR people pitch me to write about things in the newsletter, which is very funny.
That's insane.
So yeah, and I enjoy doing it. It's a lot of work, because it's kind of turned into like it's almost like a miniature magazine that I'm just publishing in a very long email every week. But yeah, I enjoy doing it and people seem to like reading it.
Yeah. I love hearing the origins of it. And because that's something that, I mean, maybe I started reading First Floor around 2021. That's when I started subscribing to it. But hearing the origins of it, starting from small, like, and then maybe also targeting a certain niche, especially one that you actually know and are familiar with so well, gave, dividends like in the long run. I'm curious about the newsletter sort of like medium, right? Like where it's straight to your inbox. There's something special about that. And there's also something very intimate about that it's just straight sent to you. I'm curious, why a newsletter? Why not a website, for example? Because all the content on there could be transferred over to a website that everyone can have access to it. So I'm curious why that format.
Yeah, I mean, well, the nice thing about Substack, the platform that I use, not to like give them a plug or anything, but the nice thing about it is that when you use that platform and you send out the emails, it does get archived online so that people who aren't subscribed can go and read it and find it that way. But I think part of the appeal for me, certainly when I started it, and I think this is still part of the appeal, is like if you publish something on a website, the way that people consume information now, unless something is like the New York Times or Pitchfork or some like very large media outlet, most people don't go direct to websites anymore. Like usually people are consuming media via social media. Like you see someone else post a link to a story, then you click on it and then you read it. So if I was just publishing First Floor only on a website, I would then have to go and promote the content via social media and, fight the algorithms on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it may be, and hope that it would go, viral, or at least just get enough traction that people would see it and then click on it. So the nice thing about First Floor is people sign up for it and it goes to their inbox, which admittedly people's inboxes can be crazy, but it's a little more curated than, your Twitter feed or your Instagram feed or whatever other social media stuff is out there. And I think that helps to sort of forge a connection, or at least just to reach people more easily. Yeah. And I do think it also sort of fosters a more personal voice for me as a writer. It's funny, like I come from this very old school mentality when it comes to journalism, in terms of like, forever in my career, I was like, I don't write about myself. I don't put myself in the story. I don't use the first person. Like I used to get so mad when I would read magazine articles. When I was working at Accelerator and I would see our competitors would do these artist interviews and the journalists would put themselves in the story and be like, I was hanging out with James Blake in his living room and we were having this kind of cocktail. And I'm just like, look, I'm reading this to read about James Blake, not to read about you hanging out with James Blake. Yeah. So I would always, anytime someone was writing for me, I would insist that they take all personal references out. I was like, be professional, like just write about your subject. And then with First Floor though, I was like, wait, this isn't just me. It's not a magazine. Like it's just me writing. Sometimes I need to explain, like I just started using I out of necessity. Yeah. Like, it's me writing and I need to explain that I am sending this, or I witnessed this thing and I'm responding to it. And I found, the people really responded to that. Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, I do appreciate that actually. Yeah, it's almost like when you, so there are some pieces when you write, especially the recent one, which we're gonna touch on, the Skrillex one. It was really, you are very clear. It came through clear that this is my opinion, and I'll walk you through why I got to this opinion, And so please continue. But yeah, I think I just wanted to say that I think that's appreciated, at least for me.
One thing that's funny, and a lot of people have said this to me since I started the newsletter, is they say when they read First Floor, they can hear me talking. I mean, people that know me, like the same people who would have read an article that I wrote on Accelerator or Resident Advisor, like even if it was a good article, they didn't necessarily hear Shawn Reynaldo speaking. Mm-hmm. But when they read First Floor, it sounds like me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I just let my guard down, or it's also, it's opinion, it's almost like comparable. I even say that sometimes in writing. I'm like, this is not a reported article. Like, yes, I will do research and I will make sure, I do check my facts and I'm referencing stuff in the real world. But at the end of the day, this is my opinion on whatever topic I'm touching on, whether it's like cultural changes in electronic music, some business practice in electronic music, some, anything. Like, it's ultimately my opinion. And if you're writing an opinion, it's okay. You should personalize it, because I'm not speaking as like the editorial board of a magazine. Right. I'm just speaking as Shawn Reynaldo.
Yeah. And I love that. It's almost, I don't know. I guess the analogy in my head too is this, because this is your project, in the same way how an artist has their own project where you're expected to actually hear their voice or their point of view of the world, and I feel like First Floor has that maybe embedded in it too. You are coming out with a new book. The pre-order is already out. Can you talk about that? And we could also talk about that also on the back end, but can you talk more about this book release?
Sure. Yeah. It's the first book I've ever done. And it's funny because I never had an intention to do a book. I mean, if you're a music writer, one of the questions that you always get asked is like, oh, well, when are you doing a book? And I never had like an idea that I just wanted to spend 2 years on researching and writing. And I was just always busy, being an editor, working and doing that kind of stuff. But a publisher called Velocity Press, which does a lot of electronic music books, approached me a few months ago, and they were like, I had been in touch with them before. It's funny, they had even said like, oh, if you ever have a book idea, send it.
Wow, cool.
And I was like, oh, well, I don't think I will, but thank you so much for the offer. And then they came back and they were like, what do you think about doing a collection of pieces from First Floor? Because, for anyone who hasn't read the newsletter, basically every week I do one long form article. So I do either like an essay or an interview with someone. And, lots of times these are like 2,000, 3,000 words, sometimes even longer. Like some of the interviews end up being like 6,000 words. They're pretty hefty pieces of writing.
Yeah.
And after 3.5 years, I've written a lot of material about a lot of different topics. And so when this publisher came to me and was like, what do you think about doing a collection? I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of the things I write about sort of like relate to one another. And it kind of, the more I thought about it, I was like, yes, these are all personal writings, but taken together, they do kind of present a comprehensive look at electronic music culture and the electronic music industry. And I think also it's a look at these things during a time that's kind of weird and where a lot of things are changing, like in the culture and the industry. And it's also unfolded during a time when the media, the dedicated electronic music media, is in a pretty fragile place. Like between the pandemic and digital media struggling in general, a lot of these places don't have resources and their revenue streams are very tied into brands and just kind of playing it safe a lot of the time. Yeah. And thankfully, I don't have advertisers. I don't have brand partners or anything like that. So I'm not really, it's not that I try to be controversial, but I'm also not shying away from thornier issues, and also asking tough questions and saying like, hey, this thing that's happening that everyone is doing, does this make sense? Does this line up with the, espoused values that electronic music was founded upon? And why not? And is that a problem? And hey, maybe this thing that everyone says is good is actually not that good and is being driven by market and cultural forces that have nothing to do with the roots of this scene. And I think, it kind of has filled like a bit of, again, I don't want to big myself up too much, but I don't see a lot of this kind of discussion happening in proper music media. I feel like people discuss these things on social media, but like social media is kind of like a free for all hellscape. I feel like very few people really enjoy arguing about anything on social media. Yeah. So like what I try and do is be like, just tackle these issues in a thoughtful way and be like, here's my take on it. Some people will agree with me, some people won't, but if they're thinking about it, then I think I'm doing my job. Mm-hmm. At least I'm doing what I set out to do. So so the book, anyways, to go back to your question. So the book is going to collect, what I think are some of my best or most thought-provoking pieces from the last 3.5 years on a variety of different topics. And it's also going to include some new information. I'm going to update everything. So it's not just like a best of, because I'm going to provide updates for everything. I'm also going to put in some exclusive new material. And I somehow convinced an artist named Martin, who people may or may not know. She's like a veteran, sort of like bass music. He's done stuff on Brain Feeder in the past and now runs a label called 3024. I've known him for a long time. I met him through the Icy Hot party that I used to run, over 10 years ago. Wow. And he agreed to write the foreword. So
that's really cool.
So that's the book. It's coming out in July 7th, but the pre-order is up now. And I mean, not to be too much of a salesman, but if anyone who pre-orders it, you'll get it before the official release date. You'll get it a bit early. So.
Amazing. I already pre-ordered. And so I will also leave the link on the show notes too, for people who are interested to pre-order. So we talked about the book, a collection of your thoughts, your essays, maybe a snapshot of like a time in electronic music, maybe also updating it also. Let's talk about, because the book and the newsletter in itself are media, forms of media. And I wanted to touch on the current state of music media, right? And, specifically for like publishing, music journalism, even before the pandemic, it was already on a sort of decline, where, for example, some of our peers, which you probably know already, some of this big, I'm not going to name names, but big publications switching to say video instead of like written format, has been in effect since 2018, 2017, and effectively, music journalists, losing their jobs, so there's that as a sort of like pre-context. And then also in your pieces, you talked about, how the current state right now feels different. It feels kind of weird. There's a certain shift that's happening or may have happened already. And so, can you please like talk about that and try to, what is the current state right now?
Sure. I mean, music media, it's in a pretty bad place, like economically, at least. And this is something that has been going on since the early 2010s. Like basically, once print media shifted to primarily online, all of these publications, the ones that managed to make that shift had to find new revenue streams, because it used to be, when I started at Accelerator, it was a print magazine, and subscriptions, yes, that brought in a little bit of money, but the real money was advertising, and advertisers paid a lot. They would pay a lot of, even for a niche electronic music magazine, these lifestyle brands would pay a lot of money for advertising. But then as soon as that shifted online, the perceived value of a banner ad, as opposed to like a glossy photo in a print magazine, even if more people see the banner ad, it's never been perceived as valuable. So like for most sort of more niche outlets, like online advertising has never gotten to the point where it's replaced print advertising. And also, once people figured out that like no one clicks on banner ads, because, or people have ad blockers and stuff like that, then advertisers started prioritizing, instead of prioritizing like, oh, we need to get our advertising in the right kind of publication. Like we want it in the publication that makes sense for the audience we're trying to reach. It started to boil down more to numbers. Like, how can we get the most potential reach? And the way to do that was, it's kind of like what happens on social media now, where people focus on like, okay, what is your audience count? And a lot of media companies started they started consolidating, where like these companies would buy like 6 or 7 publications, and then sell advertising across blocks of publication.
Okay.
Because they could be like, oh, hey, whoever, I'm just going to pick like Ray-Ban sunglasses. If you buy ads with us, we can put them in 7 different publications, on their websites. So that's obviously more attractive than a standalone independent publication with a small audience.
It's like a package deal.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyways, I mean, I'm getting a bit lost in the weeds here, but that's just an example of like revenue has never really been replaced from advertising. And so budgets have been cut, jobs have been lost. It's crazy, but basically like salaries and freelance rate in music writing across the board have been largely static for at least like 5 or 6 years now. Like, I mean, I talked about it earlier with like some of the freelance rates, and even at like, prestigious publications that everyone knows, like, they just don't pay that much. And when the job, music journalism has never been a field where people could get rich. Like, I don't think anyone became a music writer to be like, oh, I'm going to get rich doing this. But if you need to live in a city like New York or London or Berlin, which is where most music media companies have offices, it's expensive. And if the salary they're paying is $24,000 a year or whatever it is, or if you're trying to freelance and you're piecing together, jobs that are paying like $200 or $300 at a time, and they take a week each to do, it's really hard to survive for long. So there's been a lot of, when new music journalists come into the field, they'll try and do it for like a year or two, usually when they're young, and then they burn out because they're like, I can't make a living doing this. And it also feeds into, this is a problem in all the arts, but a lot of times the only people that can really afford to stick it out are people that come from privileged backgrounds, and they have money from their family or money from some other source that allows them to be a creative person as a music journalist. And, then maybe someday they get to a point where they have a higher level editorial job and are earning a decent salary. But the only reason they were able to accumulate that level of experience was because they had this privileged background. And so what's happened is like, we have all these media outlets, the ones that are left, kind of have people at the top who like still aren't earning a ton of money, but maybe they have a decent job, but they're scared to leave because there aren't a lot of jobs that they could go to and there's nowhere to move up. And then at the bottom, there's really inexperienced people who, lots of times, aren't, like I said, aren't very experienced. And then these outlets don't have the resources to train them properly. So many basic parts of music journalism have gone out the window. Things like, this is a problem in all journalism, I should be clear, but just things like line editing, fact checking, just getting more people to look at and give you feedback on your writing. Like, it's crazy how many times I've written, because sometimes I'll still do freelance pieces for other outlets. In the last few years, there's been so many times where I've submitted pieces and the editors will just be like, oh, looks good, and publish it as is. And I'll be like, what? Like, I'm not that good. I'm not that good of a writer. Like, please, like you should be suggesting changes or telling me to cut certain things or what. And that lots of times just doesn't happen at many outlets. And, so yeah, because of all this, like the quality of writing is going down. And also it's like when success is measured in terms of how many people are clicking on something, it doesn't really matter if a piece is good or not. Like, all that matters is like, does it have a headline that'll make people click? Is it about someone who's already famous that people want to click on? You look at I write about this all the time. You look at some place like Pitchfork, how many news stories can they do about Drake and Beyonce? And I don't think it's because the people who work there love Drake and Beyonce that much, but they know strategically, if you put either of those names in a headline, people will click on it on social media, which is the primary place where they're, seeing this content in the first place, and yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on, but music media, it's in a very tough place. And, it does feel like, as a result, like things like institutional knowledge are really in short supply. Proper criticism is in short supply as well. And proper criticism doesn't mean just like tear downs, like trashing people. It just means like engaging thoughtfully with art and, big picture topics and how the industry works and stuff like that. Because, putting together a 3,000 word, well-researched article takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But if it's only going to get as many views or clicks as a news story about Beyonce said something on social media, and you're an editor and you have to allocate your limited resources, what are you going to spend your resources on? Like, you can only devote so much time and effort to like thoughtful commentary and critique, because you still need to deliver these numbers for your bosses, and who then use those numbers to sell ads or seek out brand partnerships. And so, yeah, it's like it's a very tough game right now for music media.
Yeah, it is very challenging, and I could certainly feel it too, and, I guess I've lived long enough to actually see some of the institutions that and publications that I really, revere sort of like evolve into something that it doesn't look familiar to me anymore. Do you have any thoughts in, new forms? And feel free to challenge me if this is untrue. New forms of maybe, I can't really say music journalism. Say, for example, like videos on YouTube, sort of like breaking down, say, an album, or maybe exploring the history of a certain sound. To me, that could be seen as a form of music journalism. Or say an IG reel or a TikTok talking about, aesthetics of, say, electrocumbia, and how these pieces, like, are these valid forms of music media in your head?
I think they can be. I think the problem is that most of the time that they're being done, they're usually being done by amateurs. And I don't mean that in a like a harsh way. It's just, people that aren't necessarily trained as music journalists. They're not working with editors. There's no fact checking going on. It's like TikTok and YouTube. They're free for.
Yeah.
Now, of course, quality content can be done. And I think you've seen, sometimes legacy or proper music media outlets will try and make this kind of content as well. But I think the problem is it's very resource intensive. And again, it's like, if you can turn out 10 news stories where you're just basically rewording a press release that you've been sent, and in that same time, you could maybe make one video, probably not even one video. It's probably, the ratio is probably more like 50 to 1. It's really hard to justify it, especially because there's no guarantee that your videos are gonna gain traction. That's like the funny thing, for the needle drop, like that's like probably the best example of like a video based music journalism outlet. But for every one of those, there's probably 100 where you look at the view count and, it's like 3 views, or something, no one's watching it.
Yeah.
So, it's funny, like the same thing has kind of happened with newsletters. Like when I first started First Floor, I was like, oh, it's just like, admittedly, I was one of the first electronic music writers, I think, to start this kind of newsletter and do it. But when I started it, I was like, oh, within a few months, like there's going to be 10 or 20 electronic music writers with their own newsletters. Like there's no way this is going to last. And there definitely was like a little burst of other electronic music writers doing it. But I think they pretty quickly realized that to build an audience, you have to start at zero.
Yeah.
Like you have to start at zero and you have to keep producing content with no revenue coming in for a long time and hope that you find an audience. Like First Floor, I didn't turn on the paid subscription option for the first year. Like I just did it completely for free, just kind of investing in the platform. I mean, I wouldn't have waited that long, but the pandemic started and I felt like weird asking for paid subscriptions like in March 2020. So I was like, oh, I better hold off on this. But yeah, a lot of people that have started newsletters, you see it, like they do 3 and then they're like, oh wait, I only have 70 people signed up. Like this isn't worth it. And I had the advantage of like, I was starting it as a known quantity in electronic music. Like I had an established name. People followed me on Twitter to some degree, like that kind of stuff. So yeah. Anyways, to answer your question, like I do think that video and other kinds of media can be valuable and probably will be more valuable. It's just a matter of like finding a way to make it work financially, because so much of video content is just based on unpaid labor.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable. And I also think when it comes to like music discourse, people only have so much appetite for what like teenagers and young 20 somethings like. I don't mean that as like an anti-youth thing, but just those are the people who have the most time to make TikTok videos or YouTube videos and stuff like that. Right. Like, I think you need a richer palette of people contributing to the discourse. And there's not that many like 35-year-olds with the time to, learn how to make thoughtful video content about electrocumbia or any topic.
Yeah. No, that is true. That is true. And I think it's interesting when you talked about the challenges and the shifts in music journalism. There are some like parallels too in the artist's journey, as well. And we've seen that with the democratization of tools being used, production tools, education, knowledge of using these certain tools, the time, and also the resources. It's all for you to actually spend time honing your craft and building your voice. There's a certain you have to have certain resources, savings perhaps, or a rich parent to sort of like maybe like fund your journey. That is not always true, but it does help, if you're not thinking about just your own sustainability. And you also touched on the younger generation, right? And maybe this is a good segue to the article that you wrote, Who is in Charge of Culture, where you talked about the intergenerational tensions within electronic music. If I may, I want to read a pulled quote from that article. I also appreciate that you shared your journey with emo and punk, which I also share, which has been a recurring pattern in my podcast guests. Most of them come from punk or DIY backgrounds. Anyway, here's a pulled quote. Punk, indie, emo, hip-hop, jazz, electronic music. Pretty much every modern genre has gone through these kinds of growing pains, and pretty much every dedicated music fan over the age of 25 has seen a genre they love morph into something they no longer recognize or fully identify with. These shifts are normal and natural, and yet people's primary response to them is usually one of anger and dismissal, an endless parade of eye rolls, and these kids have no idea what they're talking about. Could you expand more about this article?
Sure. One of the benefits of being not young, I'm 43, if anyone's curious.
I'm with you.
But it's like in my time, in independent music culture, I've just seen a lot of trends come and go, a lot of artists come and go, scenes rise and fall. And there's so many cycles, like with culture, that just repeat themselves over and over. And yes, the faces change and whatever's tool changes, but it's a normal thing. And it's not just music. Being part of being young is establishing your own identity. And I think one of the main ways that people express their identity in a consumerist capitalist society is by what stuff they like, what stuff that they say is cool. That's kind of how you show to other people what you think is important and what's valuable. And it's just natural that when you show up, but most people have this kind of rebellious streak.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, this is what the older people are doing, but they're old. This is what I like, and every generation brings their own influences, their own shifting cultural norms. Of course, they're going to push back against what the generations before them did. And one thing that I think is really funny is you think about, it could be electronic music or any culture. As they change over time, people always pull reference the past, especially electronic music. It's the biggest recycling program in cultural recycling program in history. And it's funny now because I've been around long enough that people are now, young people are referencing the sounds that were popular when I first got into electronic music. It's the people that are 20 years old now are messing with stuff that was happening when I was 20.
Mm.
But what's funny for me is that I have no control over which elements of that time they're messing with. And what they're choosing is not what I would choose. They're not choosing the stuff that I'm oh, this is the great Y2K era stuff. Lots of times what they're going for is things that I think are terrible, I don't know, a song like Benny Benassi, Satisfaction, right? That was a cheesy, jock jam at the time. Yep. You know, like even at the time, I thought that was terrible. Or like Darude Sandstorm, like, you know, these kinds of things. But for someone who was like a toddler when those songs came out and has probably just heard them at like basketball games and like skate parks, like growing up their whole life, they don't have the same emotional baggage or about like, oh, this isn't cool. It's like, oh, this is just some sound I've been hearing my whole life. And like, now that I'm old enough to make music myself, I want to I'm in a mess with it. So electronic music right now, it's a lot of what's cool right now. It's not what I particularly like, but that's okay. Like, I think that's okay. You know, like kids right now are like really messing with like really tacky, like early 2000s, like Euro dance kind of stuff. Like, you know, it's weird to like really trendy, cool DJs playing like the Zanga Boys and Vergine, you know, like it's like almost unthinkable. You know, it's like the complete opposite of sort of the value system that like electronic music has been running on for a decade. But it's okay. Like every generation is going to reshape culture in their own image. And just because it's normal that older people aren't going to like it. And that doesn't mean that that what the younger people are doing is invalid. I mean, it doesn't also mean that it's great either. Like I reserve the right to be like, I don't really like what you're doing, but I respect your right to do it. And I recognize that, especially electronic music, it's so youth oriented. It's so tied to partying and clubbing. And like, who's at the club? Oh, sorry, someone's ringing my doorbell.
All good.
Yeah. So with electronic music, it's so youth oriented. You know, you think about clubbing and partying and who is in these spaces. It's not 40-year-olds. And
True.
In fact, when people see a 40-year-old at the club, they're like, what is that old guy doing there? You know, like, so it's strange because like electronic music now, you know, if you think back to like when it started, you know, techno started about 40 years ago. If you go back to like the first techno records in Detroit, like it has a history and it has like these overarching narratives to it. And I think because of that, there are people who have very strong feelings about what it should be and what it needs to be and what's wrong and what's right. But at the same time, like if a culture stops changing, then it stops being, you know, it loses some of its vibrance. Like if a culture is just like a jukebox where it's just playing the same hits over and over again, like that's not really, I'm not saying it has no value, but it's definitely not the same thing as like a vibrant youth culture or a source of innovation. And it's certainly not like futuristic, which is something that like electronic music is supposed, you know, it espouses, you know, like, oh, it's this bastion of futurism and pushing things forward. But if people aren't pushing those boundaries, musical or cultural, then is it really those things? Like, I don't think so. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I will say, like, I don't love the fact that right now, you know, young DJs are playing like, Gabber songs mixed with Britney Spears acapellas. And then playing like Alice DJ's Better Off Alone and like hailing it as like the greatest thing that's ever happened in dance music. But I hope that it's just a cycle and it will phase out. And you know what? In 5 years, there'll be a new generation of club kids who will push the current people out and do something else. So this stuff's always changing. And it's normal. And it's happened. It's not just electronic music, you know, it happens with emo. It's happened with punk. It's happened with so many different things. And, you know, your choices are basically like be angry about it and turn into like the metaphorical old man yelling at the cloud. or you just, accept that things are going to change and it's okay if you don't like them, like that's fine too. Like, it's funny how few people are okay with saying, I don't like what's happening, but it's not for me. So that's fine. Like everyone wants to make music into this like weird tribal battle where it's like, oh no, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And it's like, there's infinite ways to do it. And what's great about it is that in most genres, it's big enough that you can find the people who are doing it the way that you like and focus on that. And maybe it won't be what's getting the most hype or the most attention at any given moment, but there's still going to be people that think the same way you do.
1,000%. Yeah. And, we do both share like a musical background or a lineage. And, we are both the same age. And so there's a part of me where, when I hear new stuff, you could easily identify it or what it's referring to. Oh, that's UKG. That's DNB right there. Oh, have you heard of XYZ? Have you heard of, what I'm saying? Like, and that's sort of the question in my head. And then the other thing that maybe causes tension that maybe I should lean into, and I actively should lean into that, is to keep my ears open. Yes, it could be similar in its approach, but what is different here? What has changed? Even with like, say, the new DNB or jungle that's coming out, it's like, what's different here? There's probably something different here. Maybe the context, maybe the time, maybe the theme that they're exploring. And also to your point about younger kids doing different things, which sometimes gives me pause, is like, have you seen that 100 Gex like Boiler Room like clip where they were playing, what's that song? Jump in the line, let your body in time. Okay, I believe you. You know that song? On a Boiler Room.
Yeah.
On a Boiler Room set, and I was like, and so I was like, oh, everyone was just like hyped, and it's like, oh shit, okay, that's not something that I would play in my own set, but what's going on here, and so yeah.
I think I think one change that's gone on, and this is not just electronic music, I think this is music across the board, is the idea of quote unquote underground doesn't mean what it did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Or even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it may not even be relevant at all. There used to be this idea of like independent music culture as something that existed not just outside of the mainstream, but almost in opposition to the mainstream.
Yes.
Like when people were at a Fugazi show, they were happy about the fact that they were part of this thing, that it was like a special club. You had to know about it. It wasn't easy to find. And it stood in opposition to like commercialism. And, there wasn't this idea of like of everyone trying to be as big as possible. Like it was more about building a community and catering to that community and growing that community organically, as opposed to like pushing it to as many people as possible, whether they wanted it or not. And I think that mentality has largely disappeared.
Yeah.
And I think that's for a lot of reasons. And I don't say that with any value judgment. I don't like it, but that's just because of how I grew up and when I grew up.
Yes.
But if I had grown up with streaming platforms where my music consumption of a Beyonce record, or I shouldn't even say a record because there's no records.
There's no records. Yeah.
Yeah. My consumption of a Beyonce song and a Bruce Springsteen song and a Goldie jungle track from 1998 was exactly the same experience. On Spotify, all three of those things are exactly the same experience. Why would you think, then why would that person have this idea that, oh, like these are all different and should be regarded differently?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes sense of like, someone who likes 100 Gex, like, yeah, of course they like that that "Okay, I Believe You" song, but then they also probably like some weird lightning bolt track that they found on, Noise 3000 on the Noise 3000 playlist or whatever it is, And I think there's something interesting about that, the freedom of that.
Yeah.
And the idea of not having these hang-ups in terms of what's okay and what's not. Now, the downside is that it does tend to feed into like over commercialism. And it does feed into this idea of like, even if you're an independent artist, your objective should be to get as big as possible. And the ways to measure success is to have as many followers as possible, as many streams as possible. And that's what constitutes being a good artist, is having a big audience. And I think that runs counter to quality art sometimes. But, that's all, we'll wait and we'll have to see how that shakes out. And it'll probably take, it'll take a bit longer for us to find out how it does shake out.
Yeah, no, for sure. I like that you post a question of like, does underground or indie sort of like exist anymore? And sort of like sharing your observations. And to me, in the streaming age, where you said that, artists X, Y, and Z, all coming from different backgrounds, different contexts, are now sort of like flattened, in this sort of like a buffet of sounds, right? Where the culture and the context from which these artists came from are now just disappeared. They're just like redacted, and how the artist of the now has to come to terms and sort of like do the same approach as, say, the Drakes and the Beyoncés of the world, right? A rollout campaign that speaks to all, as much as possible, where the goal is to get as much streams as possible. And how that counters to maybe the creation of quality art, which I agree. When I find myself like mourning that a little bit too. And you also said that, maybe it's the time that we were born and the culture that we sort of lived through, that we're also a part of, that sort of like value these sort of like independent sort of like releases, that we're kind of looking for that, but it's sort of gone. But not sort of, but I think they still exist. They're more, I guess, if there's an iceberg, they're just much more deeper. I think of like the Bandcamps of the Bandcamp releases, and even with Bandcamp, I mean, right now with would you call it a corporate takeover? Epic Games, buying Bandcamp, even that, the last bastion of, say, independent music is now gone. And so I don't know. Do you have any additional thoughts there in terms of like just the flattening of music culture and consumption in general?
I mean, it's funny because streaming platforms, I think part of their sales pitch to society is like, they're like, oh, we've democratized music choice. You don't need a radio station to tell you what to listen to. You don't need a journalist to tell you. Like, we're getting rid of these fusty gatekeepers who think they know better than you. And I think that narrative goes down really well with the average person, because everyone loves to think that they have great taste, that they don't need anyone to tell them what to listen to. Gatekeepers, are supposed, the narrative of gatekeepers are bad has gained a lot of traction in the last decade. You think about the so-called poptimism movement,
Yes.
Just the fact that like all of these independent music outlets have completely embraced like commercial pop, or either specifically commercial pop stuff or the tropes and methodologies of pop music. And, you think about a place like Pitchfork, 20 years ago, they would have never written about Beyonce. And now they write about Beyonce more than anyone else. Yeah. So like, I think streaming has a lot to do with this. And it's just kind of like, oh, you make your own choices. But what happens in reality is when you eliminate gatekeepers, when you eliminate, gatekeeper can be a bad thing, but it can also just mean someone who's an expert, someone who has knowledge, someone who might actually have helpful information. When you remove those things and you put everyone on the same playing field, which is basically what streaming is, it's, flattening. What is going to cut through that? When there are, millions and millions of choices, what are people going to go for? Are they really going to go search for something they've never heard of presented with infinite choice? Or are they going to go for whoever is already famous? Like you see all these, there's these songs from 20 years ago getting huge because, like the Kate Bush thing last year, like there's these like weird nostalgic loops that happen because it's like it's a safe thing, or just whoever's most famous and has the biggest marketing budget. Because like if you're an independent artist and you have to compete with Frank Ocean or Beyonce or Jay-Z or whoever it is on Spotify, like how are you supposed to compete with that?
Yeah.
Like it's just impossible from a resource perspective. And it's like a losing game for independent artists. Yet a lot of them have unfortunately bought into the idea that that's the game they have to play. And, like, oh yeah, I need to be like a pop artist. I need to make music videos. I need to be on TikTok, whatever it may be. And maybe, that might work for some people, but there are other ways of doing this. Like there are other ways of building a fan base, of building music communities. Like these things happened for decades before streaming came into place. And they were, successful in the sense that they fostered viable communities and meant a lot to a lot of, millions of people around the world. And they weren't rooted in maximum exposure. And I think the loss of that is unfortunate. Now, to be fair to younger generations and stuff, there are new kinds of connection, happening online, and people form online communities. And I'm sure there's probably a 100 gex message board somewhere or Discord server that has an enormous community that means a lot to the people on it.
Yeah.
And that's, for someone like me, feels like a foreign concept and is like, oh, so that's not what I want to do. But I hope it means a lot to the people participating in it. But overall, it does feel like things have tilted away from smaller, like more focused underground communities. And it's more just like everyone's playing this like mass exposure, try and get as big as possible game, because that's the only way to make it and be recognized as a valuable artist.
Yeah, totally. Makes me, so, it's sobering. Yeah. And, dude, maybe this could be a tangential aside, since we touched on streaming. And you touched on gatekeepers, and now they're gone, replaced by now algorithms, right? Here, oh, you like this? Okay, you might like this, sort of thing. Some people, and I want to hear your take on this. Some people, are really my close friends. This shit. I don't want algorithms, telling me what to listen to. But in my experience, there's a middle ground that's sort of like, oh, it's actually helped me. Like, for example, I've been listening to a lot of Brazilian funk, because I just like it, at this point, and the YouTube algorithm really does help me. Oh, you like that one? Okay, how about this one? Oh shit, this is actually cool, and then now I go deeper the rabbit hole. So in effect, the algorithm is sort of like a curatorial tool that learns my listening habits and the styles that I want. Of course, there's also a rabbit hole there where it just continuously feeds me and not offer variety, So I wonder, like, do you have any takes there in terms of like algorithm as curator?
I mean, I have to admit, like, I'm admittedly an oddball in this situation that I'm still a purist. Like, I don't have Spotify. I don't have Apple Music.
Wow.
I don't really use any streaming services. I mean, I use Bandcamp, obviously. If I really need to listen to something, I'll go on YouTube sometimes, but I don't I'm not the kind of person who just puts YouTube on it and lets it run. Admittedly, part of this is because I have to listen to so much music for my job. You know, anyone who hasn't read First Floor, like every week, I basically recommend about 10 to 15, tracks that just came out that week. So to come up with those recommendations, I've probably listened to, it's probably at this point, it's about 100 new releases every week.
Yeah.
So it's like when I'm done listening to new releases, sometimes like my appetite for listening to more music is shrunk down. So anyways, all that said, I will say this, streaming services are popular because people like them. Like, as much as Spotify has been cast as the bad guy, and like, don't get me wrong, I think streaming has been a net negative in terms of its impact on the quality of art, the sustainability of being an artist, especially one who isn't interested in maximum commercialization. So like, I'm no fan of these things, but even with all of the negative press that Spotify has received, like the whole, the Joe Rogan thing, Daniel Ek investing in like a weapons company, like you couldn't get worse press. And yet Spotify has a bigger customer base now than it's ever had. Like, it's huge. People like it. And as much as, let me put it this way, the amount of people that are actual dedicated music fans that really care about what they're listening to and are invested in music culture, it's very small. Like in the grand scheme of things, we're not the majority. I don't even know if we're a sizable minority. Most people are happy to just have music on in the background. They want something that is unassuming, or if they're at the gym, they want something upbeat. And they don't want to think about it, and they just want to press play. And Spotify and all these other services are great at that. And those algorithms are getting smarter and smarter. And they do feed people, especially if you're not a discerning listener, they'll feed you things that you like. And the best part about it is if you don't like it, there's a skip button. Like, I've written this before in the newsletter. Like, I think for most people at this point, streaming services, it's basically what commercial radio was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, except it has a skip button. Like, it's just like a safe pair of musical hands. And if you don't like the one song, you can skip to the next one. And then if you don't like that one, you can keep skipping until you get to the one you want. So I do think, now, is that good curation? I don't know. It depends on your definition of good, like, is it like the most culturally enriching curation? Probably not. And especially when you factor in things about like, Spotify filling its playlists with these songs that they've commissioned, or that have been commissioned by companies that are like by fake artists. And then they don't have to, anyways, that's a whole, like, just Google it if you don't know about this. But like, these playlists aren't assembled in a way that is necessarily like curatorially pure. I'll just say that. So that is problematic. But at the same time, they do work and people like it. And as much as like I don't like streaming, I think that it's not designed to be sustainable for artists. It's never been designed to be sustainable for artists, but consumers like it. It's cheap, it's easy, and I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, Spotify has been around for 15 years now. It's never turned a profit, yet it has no problem raising money through investors at any time, like because it has a perceived value, and that's because it has a huge customer base. So yeah, I've written this in the newsletter a bunch. Like, I don't like streaming, but I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think artists would be better served to recognize that fact and then make a decision about how they want to interact with it. Like, do you want to be on streaming and play their game, play that game and, devote, tailor your career accordingly? Or do you want to not be on it at all? Or do you want to just be on it and ignore it? And then if you get a benefit of it, that's fine or not. I mean, I don't know. For me, I think the whole, the idea that Spotify is going to be toppled or is going to magically increase its payments, I think that's wishful thinking. Mm-hmm. I would love it if it happened, but I feel like it's a bit counterproductive. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, no, totally. It reminds me of my guest from the previous episode, Austin Roby, who co-founded Metal Label and Ampled, which is an artist-run platform. And he was, I think the question there was like, oh, could we actually form a DAO? And then we could buy out Spotify. And he was like, no, I don't think so. It's fucking expensive. It's billions of dollars. So no, we can't. But we can try. But there are like a few actionable steps that we can take. How about artist representative as part of the board? That could be actionable. But anyway, I agree with you that Spotify is not going away. They're not going to explore equitable artist models. Absolutely not. They are really it's a platform made for the masses and not for people like us, who are nerds, music nerds, and I think that that's a missing gap in this market, for music nerds. And it's something that I also talk about with my fellow, my friends over, who are part of Web3, it's like that's not made for us, how about we create our own way of doing things? And it's hard. It's really hard, and sometimes I question too, like, does my background also, is my way of thinking right now about music consumption and experience is rooted, and I mean, I acknowledge that it's rooted with my experiences, but it's like, is this where the younger generation want to go? Curated experiences and consumption. But I think I also agree with you too that the space is so big in terms of experiencing and consuming music, whatever approach you take, whether it's much more low key, you build a community and you hold spaces for that culture to unfold. I think to me, is much more interesting really than going all out on Spotify. And anyway, I just wanted to, lob that in, I want to talk about raving as folk art. This is one of my, I guess, along with other articles, I continuously go back to this, because it resonates with me. It also sort of I see myself in this too. And so I have, and maybe you could add more to this. I have a pulled quote here. And this is after you actually built the context. And so maybe you could add more context to this. It becomes necessary to place dance music in a different cultural framework, one that doesn't revolve around ideas of innovation, futurism, and pushing the envelope. In many ways, dance music is transitioning, or perhaps has already transitioned, into a kind of folk art, and regarding it as such could potentially allow its most dedicated defenders, myself included, to stop howling about the genre's lack of new ideas, or at least make peace with its current place in the wider musical universe. Can you talk more about that, please?
Sure. I mean, this came out of, something I've written about a lot is a lot of the music in dance music has not really changed very much in certainly the last 20 years, at least. If you think about the foundational sounds of electronic music, house, techno, drum and bass, electro, a lot of these were innovated in the 80s and 90s. And the bulk of releases that are coming out are essentially just derivatives of these sounds, or sometimes not even derivatives. Sometimes it's wholesale copies or people emulating sounds, people fetishizing gear from these eras, production techniques from these eras. And it's strange because if you think about the roots of dance music, you think to Detroit and Chicago in the 80s. Like the producers that were doing this were buying these drum machines and synths. They were buying like cheap, lots of times cheap, unpopular gear because that was what they could afford. But they used it and they made this music that sounded like it was the future. They took influences from so many different things and made something that sounded like it was the future. But it wasn't necessarily rooted, it was just a moment in time that birthed this amazing new culture that became a global phenomenon. But and ever since then, you think about dance music and its aesthetics and just like what the artwork looks like. It has all these like sci-fi imagery and it's like so tied to ideas of the future and, there's a lot of technological tie-ins and it's all very futurism. Innovation is what's important. But the longer this goes on, and it's like people are making techno records that sound like they could have come out in 1992 or 97 or 1988 or whatever it is. It's like, this is not futuristic. Like this is nostalgia work. Like this is nostalgia. Like this is just recycling the past endlessly. And, that can be a cause of frustration for people that like got into it because they like new music. And I don't want to say that there's been no innovation. Like obviously dubstep happened in the 2000s and then bass music in the 2010s, that even those are kind of, derivatives of like drum and bass and like the hardcore continuum, not to get too nerdy about it, but, it doesn't feel like a lot of new stuff that's happened. And a lot of the most innovative things that have happened in the last few years aren't so much people developing new genres. It's more like a lot of it is people kind of taking commercial pop tropes. You think about someone like Sophie, right? Like Sophie, who was like, a genuinely innovative, groundbreaking producer. But a lot of what she did was just kind of taking sort of like pop sounds and stuff like that, and then repurposing them for making weird electronic music. And I feel like that's a lot of what's going on now too. It's like a lot of, I joked about like kids taking Britney Spears samples or playing the Venga Boys or whatever, but it is like, that's what innovation has become, where it's like, it's just recontextualizing these like sort of like known pop tropes. And there's something interesting about that, but it's not really innovation. In fact, in some ways it feels very conservative. Like it feels very like taking shelter in the familiar and like, oh, I'm repackaging this Britney Spears song, but it's still a Britney Spears song. Like to me, it doesn't feel very innovative. But anyways, to get back to the point of like, I think if dance music, if it could get to a place where it let go of the idea that like it needs to be groundbreaking, it needs to be sonically innovative, and just accepts that like it's an established part of the culture and it has certain norms like any other cultural tradition. And those norms, you think about what those norms are: a DJ, a dark room, a crowd, loud music, people dancing. Like this is what makes dance music culture. These these are the traditions that get passed down from one generation of ravers to the next. Like, that's what's being preserved. And yes, the music is part of that. And if the music stops innovating, it doesn't mean that the culture is dead. It just means it's different. And it becomes like a sort of folk tradition that gets passed down from one generation to the next. And there's value in that. And there's intergenerational connectivity between that can be passed along. And yeah, I mean, I don't know where the exact line is between flirting with folk tradition and becoming a full-fledged folk tradition is, but it does feel like that transition is underway. And yeah, I just think the dance music community might be a little less contentious if people like just kind of made peace with that idea. And like, the thing is, it wouldn't be the first genre that's happened to. You think about like something like jazz, right? You know, and jazz even has like similar roots, came from like Black communities. It was wildly innovative, like for decades. And then now, like, admittedly, I'm not a jazz expert, but I'm fairly certain that like jazz has not radically changed for the past few decades. For the most part, it's people just kind of like recycling, reinterpreting ideas that were first forged decades ago. It doesn't mean jazz can't be enjoyed. It doesn't mean that jazz no longer has any value. It just means that like it's kind of more of a folk art at this point, as opposed to like a genuine source of innovation. And yeah, I think dance music is kind of getting to be in the same boat.
Yeah. It's really eye-opening for me reading this article and hearing you expound on it. And if I may double click on dance music as folk art, you pulled the definition of folk art from Museum of International Folk Art, where the definitions are: it should be decorative or utilitarian. Could be used every day or reserved for high ceremonies. I mean, it makes me think already of like events, you know, handmade elements or new synthetic components, learned formally or informally within a community of practice or for sale, you know. It's got intangible forms, you know, inclusive. Like all of this sort of like when you sort of like outline that, it's like, oh, actually maps, or it actually points towards it, you know, seeing what's happening right now in dance music culture. It's quite interesting when put in that sort of like framework. And for me personally, I was like, this does make sense, you know, but I find myself also like, well, what is the future then, you know? And maybe that's go ahead.
I was going to say the future might be more of the same, but you know, that doesn't mean that it can't have value. You think about, I don't know, people that like Irish line dancing or, you know, whatever, you know, like river dance kind of stuff. Like that hasn't changed in a long time, but some people love doing it, and it's a tradition that gets passed down. And I think one of the key signifiers that you can tell when something is become a folk art is like, when everyone knows the broad strokes of what it is. Like in 1992, if you asked the average, you know, suburban married couple to define what a rave is, they probably would have no idea, or would just have some completely tabloid idea. Now you could ask, in 2023, you could ask pretty much anyone, what is a rave? What is, you know, and they'd probably, I mean, it might be like a bad caricature, and they might do some like wiki, you know, stupid shit. But like everyone has an idea of what a DJ is, what a rave is, what a club is, what dance music sounds like, you know? And again, it's a caricature, and it was, but it still is like, it's broad enough now, it's infused enough into the wider culture that it's part of the mainstream. And that doesn't mean it's like in the pop charts, but it's part of the fabric of broader culture. And when something reaches that level, it does become a kind of folk art. And like I said, that doesn't make it unique. I think this happens to most music genres. You can say the same thing as arguably happened with rock and roll. Like,
True.
Started sooner.
Yeah.
You know, like, when was the last like real rock and roll innovation? Like grunge? Like in the 90s? Was that like the last like real breakthrough? And like, so yeah, dance music kind of feels the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And, yeah, I agree with that. I think the thought that comes to mind for me is that all along musical history, let's hone in on electronic music, one that we're both familiar with. A lot of the evolution of sound and aesthetics came from the tools that were used. You touched on like using these, in the early 80s. And maybe even, in the early 80s where a lot of like house and techno was sort of made, using these cheap like analog synthesizers or drum machines. That's what they had, but then these tools also like shape the sound. Now, fast forward to say the 2010s when dubstep came around, and along with it, the democratization of tools, Ableton Live, FL, everything, Logic, opening up new sound territory, where I think in maybe in the late aughts and 2010s was when sound design became sort of like part of the producer lexicon, sound design, how do you design sound? How do you, create really new and weird sounds? I mean, Sophie, she's a perfect example of that, of really using the tools and just really breaking it, until she came with like new weird sounds. And so now in 2023, where, there was this whole Web3 boom, artists exploring NFTs and new ways of distributing music. And now we also have generative AI, across all different sort of the creative expressions from image generation to sound generation. With these tools and where we're at, how do you think this would affect the evolution of not only electronic music, but maybe music culture in general? Or is it something that you think about sometimes, or not really?
It's something I think about. Although I have to say, I mean, I'm not an expert in Web3 or AI, and I think it's still very early in both. And we really don't have a handle on how it's going to play out. And, there's a real tendency to either be like, this is going to be a revolution, or the sky is falling. And I'm kind of like in a wait and see mode. I mean, in terms of Web3, like, I'm not super optimistic about the idea of people selling like people selling NFTs like with an animated GIF and a piece of and a song attached. Like, I think it's a very big leap for people to get their heads around the idea of ownership in that way. Like, it basically, for that model of NFTs to succeed long term, it would basically require most consumers completely redefining what ownership means and wanting to pay for something that they don't physically have and that can also be enjoyed by an infinite number of people who didn't pay anything for it. Like that's a very big change. I think in terms of Web3, what's most interesting is all of the like potential utility that hasn't been unlocked yet. And it's not necessarily tied to financialization. Things like, I really love the idea of, being able to keep all your own data. So like, let's say you build a following. Let's say for me, if Substack had a Web3 function and I could build up my own audience on there, all my subscribers, all my, all the articles I've written. And then one day I decide, you know what? I don't like Substack anymore. I want to move over to this. I want to move over to this other platform. And if it was Web3 enabled and I could just port all of my information to a new platform using NFTs or some other application of Web3, that would be amazing. Like, also, you know, things like if, all audio files were coded using Web3 NFT technology, so that the royalties could be tracked more easily, like so that every time they get played, it's recorded on the blockchain and then they could use that to calculate royalties. Like that kind of stuff is really exciting to me. I don't know if it will ever come to fruition because that stuff isn't necessarily profitable for the companies that are currently in charge of music culture, but you never know. In terms of AI, what's scary about AI is it's going to make it really easy to make mediocre music. Like it will enable pretty much anyone to make mediocre music. And it's already very easy to make mediocre music, but it's like, if you're going to have like the AI Pro Tool in 5 years and you're going to be able to be like, make me a house track that sounds like Levon Vincent. Oh, okay. Make it a little livelier. Okay. Add a marimba sound, like there's going to be a lot of like really hacky filler stuff. And it's just going to increase the volume of content in the world. And everyone's already drowning in content. That being said, you could make the same argument about any kind, almost, you could have make the same argument about drum machines. You can make the same argument about synthesizers when they came out. You can make the same argument about Pro Tools when it first came out. Technology makes things easier. That's what technology does.
Yeah.
So, I do think that whenever AI becomes more real, I mean, it's happening very quickly. And the music production tools come along, I think there will be people who find new ways to use it, that use it, I don't know, use it as a sketchboard, as a launching pad to then just explore creativity in other ways. I think there will be people that manage to give it really weird prompts that like don't make sense and end up making some insane new art out of it. I think it's also going to like further eliminate the barriers between music and other kinds of art. Like imagine if you can be like, tell an AI, I want you to remake the movie Heat, but instead of Al Pacino, I want you to put Brad Pitt in. And then I want you to rewrite the movie score as though Giorgio Moroder wrote it in the style of Scarface. And you just see and you come up with like a brand new AI movie with a brand new soundtrack. And like, it sounds ridiculous, but these kinds of things could happen. Yeah. Like the technology is moving so fast, and I don't think people really have a handle on just how profound the potential for changes. Now, the pessimistic part of me says like, of course, there's going to be people that use this for like the worst possible stuff.
Yes.
And companies, movies that don't have a budget are just going to use some like shitty AI to make the movie score instead of hiring like artists. It's going to eliminate a lot of jobs in music, but who knows, maybe, so there's going to be bad things that happen. And there's going to be a lot of bad art that is made as a result. But I don't want to, but at the same time, there's no stopping this.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of any technology in human history where humans were like, oh, hey, we could do this. Maybe it's a bad idea. Let's not do it. Like humans always do it. Like they're just, we can't help ourselves. Like people are going to keep making this stuff, even though it's funny. Like you read AI coders now, they get interviewed and they're like fully aware that they could be bringing about the destruction of humanity, but they're like, yeah, but we're doing it anyway. Like, because there's something about human curiosity. So
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't, I hope the machines don't kill us all. But I do think that there could be some incredible art that comes out of it, and we probably can't even really fathom what it will be. So
yeah. Well put. I would say I agree with with most of what you've shared. I mean, just letting you know that I'm also very much an optimist at heart, and so I tend to see the possibilities. And maybe the downfall there is that I don't think about the challenges that come along with it. And I think it's sobering that, along with these possibilities could also come these challenges, and one of them would be, loss of jobs, or loss of like careers in certain fields. It's, to me, like generative AI has the possibility to, automate the grunt work. Recently I've seen, this tweet that's been going around. You probably have seen it on your feed too, where there's an AI, like a chat GPT like sort of like chatbot integrated onto a DAW. The melodies are corny, but then I see the potential there of like automating grunt work, where a lot of producers really spend maybe 60% of their time on, let me cut this foot just perfect right here, that could be automated. And I see a world where you're not, instead of you doing grunt work, it's more of like conceptual, like, hey, what weird shit, like your example of like that AI movie of like putting all these like different, maybe weird prompts and weird touch points into creating something new with it, which I think to me is very much like how creativity operates, right? Pulling here, and then mix it into something new. And then, to your point about Web3, I believe you're talking about platform risk or mitigating platform risk, where you could easily sort of transfer over not only your identity. If you're someone like yourself who has a sort of audience, you can also easily transfer that audience and take them with you everywhere you go. I think that's a wonderful use case for it. And then also the distribution and royalty and attribution, all that stuff, I think is something that already been being explored in Web3. I hope that gets, mass wide like adoption, because truly, we're sharing one ledger, it would be easy to pinpoint, where did this sample come from? And how could we automate these like sample shares, anyway, like that's certainly, through the lens of, like glass, like rosy glass, like lens, and to me, speaking to people like yourself who both see the possibilities and challenges is something that's needed and very much, I guess, healthy, to talk to, like for optimists like me, yeah.
I mean, I think for Web3 especially, the sooner the financialization aspect is mitigated or minimized,
Yes.
The better it will be. The problem, of course, is the financialization aspect is what brought in all of the investor money in the first place. So it's really hard to balance that. I mean, it's crazy how many people in the last year have pivoted from Web3 to AI, because that's where all the investor money is going now. Because it's like, this bubble burst on NFTs and crypto, better move to AI because that's the hot thing. So we'll see if there's enough sustained interest in Web3 to like actually build out the utility on these things. Who knows? I mean, maybe if AI gets good enough, AI will be what ends up building out these Web3 tools, because it will be able to do the grunt work for free or for cheaper. So I don't know.
I mean, that's correct. I mean, I can essentially ask GPT, create me a smart contract that does this XYZ. It could just generate the code for you, you know? And so you're right. Like there's already, I mean, it's reality now, you know, that you could create that. Okay, let's talk about Skrillex is Green Day. And I'll read a pulled quote here. Does any of this sound familiar? Swap Green Day for Skrillex, Dookie for Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites, and Quest for Fire, the newest album, for American Idiot. And these two stories start to look awfully similar. Just as Green Day's success flew in the face of punk tradition, Skrillex and the EDM boom upended dance music orthodoxy. And while that pissed off a lot of people in the process, it also took the genre to a new commercial heights, while ushering legions of young listeners into the rave tent for the very first time. For those newbies, what came before didn't really matter. And as their adoration turned Skrillex into a kind of demigod, it was their ideas about what constituted dance music that seeped into the mainstream. So yeah, let's talk about this. Let's talk, because it's a really interesting article. You actually were given the opportunity to write about the new album, Skrillex's new album, but then you turned it down. So walk us through, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because like an outlet approached me and was like, hey, do you want to review the new Skrillex album? And I said no, because I'm not really a fan of Skrillex. I'm not like an EDM guy, but I also I'm not really that interested in writing a like EDM sucks piece, which to me is like, that's been done. And I also don't think it's that interesting in a review to be like, hey, this music isn't really for me, because Skrillex, if you're 40 something years old, Skrillex is not for you. Like, and that's okay. Like that's the way I feel about it. I just feel like it's not for me, in the same way that, I mean, 100 gecs isn't for me either. I'm not the target audience. But yeah, anyways, but then the irony is that after I turned down doing this review, I ended up writing this really long piece. That's much longer than a review would have been. Just kind of reflecting on like Skrillex and his place in the wider dance music canon. And yeah, it just really reminded me a lot of what happened with punk rock in the 90s. You know, if you think about Green Day, like punk started bubbling up in the late 70s and was this very vibrant, albeit underground culture that had a global community. You know, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And then Green Day came along and got signed to a major label, and Dookie all of a sudden got punk in rotation on top 40 radio stations. Yep. And it became this pop phenomenon. And all of a sudden, you know, every teenager all over the world is like getting manic panic to dye their hair and buying Doc Martens and being punk. And punk became this commercialized identity in a way that it never had been before. And that upset a lot of people, you know, like, which makes sense. Of course it would. Like if your whole identity was based on this non-commercial, non-mainstream community, and then all of a sudden that community gets co-opted by corporate America or corporate interests, like that's upsetting. Yeah. But no amount of you getting upset about it is going to stop it. And punk got bigger. You know, punk became a huge phenomenon and kind of, you know, became just another piece of the mainstream cultural fabric, so to speak. And I feel like if you look at dance music, EDM is pretty similar in terms of its impact. When you look at EDM and compare it to that like 90s punk boom, it feels pretty similar, where it used sort of the same tropes, the same basic framework, the idea of the DJ and people dancing and stuff like that. But it just leveled it up. It just leveled up the show aspect of it. And And the thing is, it's funny, is like EDM was more commercially successful than dance music ever was, especially in America. You know, like this thing where like EDM people in the early 2010s were playing, you know, doing tours, playing 40 or 50 dates in the US. Like no DJ was doing that before that. Like, you know, DJs could maybe play like 5 or 10 cities at the most in the US and then would spend, you know, most of their time in Europe. So, yeah, like Skrillex, when he came out I was working at Accelerator at the time. He was like a joke. It was like this nerd, this like nerdy guy with like his dumb haircut and his glasses, and he's jumping on the DJ booth. And it was just like, this sucks. This is not dance music. But you know what? A lot of people, that was their introduction. That was their introduction to dance music. And yeah, some of them went on to discover better stuff, but it doesn't mean that Skrillex and EDM wasn't like forever part of their DNA. And now people that were teenagers then are now in their 20s and are becoming artists and are putting out records. And you ask a producer who's 25 years old, like, how did you get into dance music? They're probably going to say something about Skrillex. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, I heard Jeff Mills when I was 12. They're going to be like, no, I heard Skrillex when I was 12.
Yeah.
And then maybe they found Jeff Mills later, maybe. But young people usually don't care that much about what came before them. I talked about this earlier a bit, but like, you know, they want to make their own scene. They want to have their own heroes and stuff like that. And Skrillex has been a constant for young dance music people that are in their 20s now. Skrillex has been a constant for most of their life where they've been paying attention. So for him to come out now with his album after being absent for a while, it's kind of like his big return.
Yeah.
And he's kind of gotten this hero's welcome of like, oh yeah, everyone loves Skrillex now. He's that funny nerd guy. And like, even people that were adamantly against him have just kind of accepted it. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, Skrillex, he's just another part of the fabric, and he's famous enough that he's going to get celebrated. And it just reminded me a lot of American Idiot, how like Green Day, that album solidified their status as like forever rock stars. Like it was their big grandiose statement. And Skrillex kind of feels that way now. Like Skrillex is now famous enough that he doesn't need to make a hit album ever again. Like he's always just going to be famous for being Skrillex. And I mean, that's fine. That's just how culture works. I don't like Skrillex. Like I'm not particularly interested in the music he's making. I think a lot of what he's doing is very commercial. You know, he does a lot of like collaborations with like very mainstream pop and hip hop stars and artists. And like, that's not really what I listen to. To me, it doesn't really speak to like what electronic music is all about. But at the same time, it's bigger than the electronic music it's like. It's in terms of like a global impact. He is a consequential figure. And I think anyone who denies that is like living in a fantasy world. Like, yes, I would love it if Jeff Mills was as famous as Skrillex, but that's just not the case. No. Just in the same way that like Ian MacKaye from Fugazi was never as famous as Billy Joe from Green Day and never will be as famous, you know, and yeah, I think also like the fact that Skrillex is this kind of icon now, this icon that transcends dance music and is just part of the pop music fabric. It speaks to that whole idea of dance music as folk art as well, yes. Where it's just like, you know, even like, you know, not to be gender normative, but like suburban moms know who Skrillex is. You know, and when the most famous people in a genre are recognizable to people that aren't fans of that genre at all, it's obvious that the genre has reached a new level of ubiquity in the wider culture. And there's no going back. you like, it's like once you go through that door, you can't take it back to the underground. Like, sure, you could, there are pockets of people who can do that, but you can't pull the whole culture back through the rabbit hole and be like, oh, let's turn back the clock to 1998 or whatever year that you decided to fetishize. So anyways, I could go on and on about this, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, no, totally. I think I think you really provided and situated Skrillex's album, in the context of the now, and also sort of like while tying it and also like offering parallels to other artists like Green Day, for example. There's a quote that I also saved here, where you said, Skrillex's new release, Quest for Fire, has arrived at a time when young music fans are experiencing high levels of anxiety due to the pandemic, political and environmental crises. Despite the music itself being less important, Skrillex's re-emergence is seen as a source of joy and release for those in need of a break from their future. I think it's also important to take note of that, of the general, maybe social sentiment, especially young music fans, just coming off the pandemic and this. And again, maybe tying this to like something has changed also in music culture. And this might also have a contribution to this album. Yeah.
One thing I've written about in the newsletter is that like post-pandemic, like it's really only in the last year that dance music has quote unquote gotten back to normal. And the biggest trend is that besides like all the pop kind of experimentation and flirtation that I've talked about, is like there's an appetite for like big, boisterous songs. Like there's never been more bangers being made in the history of dance music.
Yeah.
Like people like want fun. They want party music. The tempos are really fast. It's not subtle. It's not nuanced, like garish colors. You think about how Gen Z dresses, and like how they dress when they go to the club. It's not minimalist, fair dying, the stereotypical all black. They're wearing like crazy colors, crazy outfits. It's like a throwback to like 90s raver club kid days. Where it's just like, I'm going to look as crazy as possible. And I feel like that speaks to the music too. And like, if you think about EDM and Skrillex now, it's like, that's the vibe. It's not like, let's be depressed about the earth being on fire. It's like, yeah, the earth is on fire, but let's party in the meantime while we can. Like it's this weird kind of like nihilism that is like just leading kind of to like somewhat mindless partying.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you draw a parallel to American Idiot, like the vibe of American Idiot is very different, but that album spoke to that political moment. It was like a post 9/11, like America was like, in the first term of the George W. Bush presidency, there was wars going on. America still had this like 9/11 hangover, and there was like a lot of political angst. And that's what American Idiot was about. It was about speaking to that moment and speaking to people's angst and like tensions that they felt. And the album succeeded as a result. Now, the new Skrillex album I'd say it hasn't turned out to be as like consequential as American Idiot, but I think that's just because albums in general have a shorter shelf life. But I think Skrillex's persona fills the same role. And I think that's one change is like, I think now it's like artists are more famous just for being themselves, as opposed to like the albums are almost like a sideshow. Like, oh yeah, like an album is just an excuse to celebrate an artist for being themselves. And people really like celebrating Skrillex right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great observations. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I see that too. Okay, zooming out, we talked about, and there's a certain through line, all these pieces that we sort of spotlighted and talked about. Times are changing. The styles that sounded new or felt new doesn't feel new in 2023. We talked about intergenerational tensions. We talked about musical art forms evolving, and potentially where they're going. And we talked about potential mutations too of culture, music, aesthetic. Let's switch to lightning round. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have like 5 questions here. 3 current favorite Substacks or newsletters that cover culture.
Oh gosh. One of my favorites is called Why Is This Interesting? It is not music focused. It's just done by a couple of guys, I think, who are actually have worked as like creative consultancies and stuff. But every day they basically post about different topics that they think are interesting. And sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's like fashion, sometimes it's like just random bits of like travel. Like, I don't know, it's really good. Very well curated. Again, it's called Why Is This Interesting? I really like this guy named Tim Goodman. He has a Substack called The Bastard Machine. He's actually a TV writer. He used to be the TV columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle and then the Hollywood Reporter, but now he's just doing his own Substack. And I think I've really always enjoyed his writing about television. And let's see, one more. I should know more of them. Oh, this is an easy one. He doesn't publish that often, but Martin, who's writing the foreword for my book, has a newsletter that he does intermittently called 4 Things. And as the title implies, he just picks 4 things that he likes. Sometimes it's books, sometimes it's music. But he's just a very thoughtful writer and someone who brings a lot of experience and perspective. And yeah.
Wonderful.
There you go.
Name 3 artists who are doing the most interesting stuff in electronic music currently.
Oh gosh. You know, what's funny is I listen to so much electronic music that sometimes like the individual pieces of music just kind of like blow by me. This is kind of an obvious answer, but Ski Mask has been really excellent, like for several years now, and just continues to put out great music. I mean, honestly, Ilion Tape as a label in general, which is the label outside of stuff, is one of my favorites. But yeah, Ski Mask continues to be quite innovative. I don't know if I can say best right now, but I will say one album that I'm really enjoying at the moment is by an artist named Doc Sleep. She actually is, like me, a former San Francisco person. She lives in Berlin now, and she's always like kind of been a behind the scenes, more dance music person, who has like kind of like a low key persona, but she always did like dance music releases, kind of like house techno-y stuff. But she just put out her debut album, and it's on the Tartelette label, and it's really excellent. Like it's surprisingly like ambient leaning, kind of new agey ambient, but I really enjoy that. And it's one of my favorites this year. And then, gosh, one more artist who I really think is amazing right now. You know what? Let me just...
It's okay.
You know what? Honestly, there's a lot of people I like, but it's really hard to be on the spot pick people. Like the best way that people can find out what I like, just to plug myself, is read the newsletter. Literally every week I put in musical picks that I really like. Oh wait, you know what? I just thought of one. There's a French guy named Simo Cell. He's actually done a lot of stuff on the Liberty Sound label previously, but over the last year or 2, he's been running his own label called Temet, Temet. And it's kind of just like weird bass music stuff, but I'm really enjoying that.
Love it. 3 favorite books about music culture. They could be old ones. They could be new ones.
3 books about music culture. Oh man. I wish you had warned me about this lightning round.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. All right. 3 books about music culture. Last Night a DJ Saved My Life is a really like comprehensive history of early DJ culture. It's really UK focused, so it's not like the whole story, but it does have a lot of great history and information. I enjoy that one.
Classic.
There's an oral history of punk rock. I think it's just called Punk by Legs McNeil that really chronicles a lot of the early punk history, like starting with like the Stooges all the way through like 70s New York and, you know, the Ramones and the downtown scene, and then also London and, you know, Sex Pistols and the Clash. Like that's a really great music book. And let's see, one more that I really liked. Gosh. You know, this is, I really enjoyed Kim Gordon's Girl in the Band. I thought that was like a really interesting, well done autobiography that, you know, Sonic Youth is like such a incredible band that transcends so many different scenes and eras. And she just has a really interesting biography. So yeah, I enjoyed that one.
Wonderful. I'll put that on my to read list. 3 developments in music culture that make you cringe.
I would say, oh gosh, let's see, this is hard. I would say artists embracing TikTok and other social media platforms when they don't make sense for their artistic identity and the kind of music that they're making.
Mm.
Like if someone specializes in making 9-minute long techno tracks and they're like 40 years old, they don't need to be on TikTok trying to make viral content. It's just very odd to me. Thankfully this has died down and it's like a bit of a cliche, but there was a lot of like really awful NFT stuff going on like a year, 12 to 18 months ago, just like a lot of like, you know, Dogecoin art, like attached to like a really bad, like drum loop that someone made. And then they were selling it for like, you know, 17 ETH or whatever it is. And then it getting sold, that kind of stuff. I mean, I have to be honest, I really have not seen very much NFT art that has impressed me. So, I mean, that's like a really cliche critique, but it's definitely cringeworthy. And let's see, what else? Gosh, there's so much. And I mean, just in terms of dance music, I talked about this already, but a lot of what's going on with like the really commercial pop flirtation where people are sampling, you know, Britney Spears or the Venga Boys or whatever it may be, and then mixing it with like a reggaeton beat and then like putting it with like at a gabber tempo. Like, I understand why artists are doing this, you know, but it makes me cringe. Like there was a story, a really excellent feature actually that Chal Ravens wrote about this phenomenon for DJ Mag at the end of last year. And she told a story about a DJ who played the song Cotton Eye Joe at Panorama Bar. And this DJ like was interviewed about why they thought it was like a good idea and why they thought it was a totally valid choice. And, you know, they're entitled to their opinion, but like hearing that kind of stuff, hearing about like DJs at these like, you know, an nominally underground space like Panorama Bar, like playing a song like Cotton Eye Joe and thinking that they're really like fucking up the system or something, like to me, that makes me cringe personally. And it feels a bit disrespectful to the history of the music that it came from. But again, I feel like young artists being disrespectful to the history of the music you're getting into. It, par for the course. It happens, it happens anyways. But I don't want to hear it. That's not what I want to hear in my own personal listening time.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Insert old man yells at the cloud GIF. Sure. Just kidding. Okay, last question, and maybe you can take your time with this one. In your own words, what does 21st century creativity look like?
Oh, wow. It's a very big question.
It is a big question. Yeah.
I think what people respond to the most now is authenticity, which seems almost counterintuitive in a time of social media and people having these like ultra polished sort of veneers to their artistry where everything is like hyper curated via Instagram. But I do think that, and I actually wrote a newsletter about this with DJs. Like, I feel like what people respond to now more from artists is not necessarily the music that they're making. I feel like people like the idea of musicians and want to look up to and identify with musicians. But in a time where like the music making process has been democratized to a certain degree through technology, and that's just, it's getting easier and easier to make passable music. So when everyone can make music, what differentiates you? It's you. It's your identity. And that can mean anything. That could mean the ideas you stand for. That can mean the community or, background, your community you're part of, the background you come from, the place you come from, whatever it may be. That's what people are responding to. And I think artists, the idea of like the mysterious artist who's anonymous and just makes banger tunes, like, I think it's going to be harder and harder to be that person as an artist. And I mean, that's unfortunate, like I love a lot of those kinds of artists, but I think realistically with social media being so ever present, like people want to respond to a person, even if that person is a curated person, like you think about, I don't know, someone like Arca, right? Like Arca seems like very intentional in the images that she puts forth and does fashion shoots, and it's all like, but at the same time, she represents so many things, she represents like queer and trans culture. She represents Latin culture. She represents this like very hyper online sort of way of being. She represents blending genres without caring about like, oh, should this sound go with this sound? Sort of in the same, very much in the same vein as like someone like Sophie, So, I do think that's the kind of things, like that's what artistry is going to look like. It's going to be about like kind of making a persona or a character, and it needs to feel authentic. Even if it's not authentic, it needs to feel authentic, or it needs to tap into something authentic. And yeah, I think that's what it's going to look like. That's scary. I don't envy artists having to be in that place and having to be so vulnerable to the public just to like be successful. But that's why I'm not an artist.
Yeah. Authenticity. Yeah. Yeah. Huge takeaway there. And a part of me also sort of like yourself, like I'm a fan of artists who are mysterious. So I kind of mourn that too, because you don't see much of them around, or there's, the incentives are different now. You're almost disincentivized to be mysterious. But yeah.
I mean, what's funny is you can actually, you think about someone like Burial, right?
Yeah.
Who is like fairly anonymous. But even he has a persona as the anonymous guy,
Yeah.
like he's the anonymous guy who made tracks sampling video games and old, and combining it with old UK garage, like that's still an identity. Like it's an identity based in mystery. So it's like, there aren't really any rules, but it's like, it's almost like artists, you need to be able to boil down who they are in like a sentence or two. And if that sentence or two is something intriguing or interesting, or that speaks to a group of people that like no one else is speaking to, like, then it can be viable and it can connect with people.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Shawn, this has been a wonderful conversation, wide ranging. Certainly, I'm very honored to have you on, dude. So thank you so much for sharing your insight, your experiences, your knowledge. I truly appreciate you, man. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. So where could people find you? What's your social media of choice? How can people connect with you?
I mean, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, although I'm not like super active on either one, but people can find me. I at least like post links to my work. Shawn Reynaldo, all one word on both. The best way to keep track of what I'm doing though is probably to subscribe to my Substack, which is called First Floor, just firstfloor.substack.com. And there is a free option and a paid option. And there's no shame in signing up for the free option if you don't want to shell out cash right away. And most of the content in the newsletter actually is free. So, and I also post links in the newsletter to like other projects I'm working on and stuff like that. And of course the book, I have the book coming out again. It's called First Floor Volume 1, Reflections on Electronic Music Culture. It'll be out in July. And if you want to get your hands on it earlier, you can pre-order a copy, and then hopefully you'll get it in June sometime.
Lovely. I will share all those links on the show notes. And I already pre-ordered the book. I'm excited for it, even though I've read maybe 80% of your writings already. I'm still very stoked about it. Shawn, again, thank you. I know it's nighttime over there where you're at. It's probably been a busy day for you. Thank you for the time. And I will see you around, dude.
Great. Thanks again for having me.